If you can't control your emotions, people will control you. Most people misunderstand emotional control. It's not about staying calm. It's about how your mind silently shapes your behavior, your relationships, and the way people respond to you without you realizing it. If you stay until the end, you'll understand the psychological patterns behind your reactions, why you repeat certain behaviors, and how your mind actually builds emotional habits in daily life. Because the real issue is not what you feel, it's what your mind does with what you feel. And most people never notice this process happening. Now here's a question that may be more personal than it seems. Why do some people move forward after a breakup, a rejection, or a painful life experience, while others remain emotionally attached for months, years, or even decades? Why does the mind keep returning to someone who is no longer present? Why do certain memories refuse to disappear? Why do some people replay the same conversations, the same mistakes, and the same emotional wounds long after the event itself is over? The answer is far deeper than simple attachment. Psychology shows that the inability to move on is often connected to hidden emotional patterns, unresolved psychological needs, identity conflicts, and mental habits that operate beneath conscious awareness. In this video, you will discover the psychological mechanisms that keep people trapped in the past, why emotional attachment can become stronger after loss, how the brain reinforces emotional memories, and the behavioral patterns that prevent genuine emotional recovery. This is not just about relationships. It is about understanding how the human mind processes loss, uncertainty, loneliness, emotional dependence, and the search for meaning. Welcome to a space dedicated to understanding human behavior, modern emotions, and the hidden forces that shape our inner lives. A place where psychology helps explain anxiety, relationships, emotional patterns, and the thoughts that quietly influence everyday decisions. Because once you understand why people can't move on, you may begin to understand something important about yourself as well. Have you ever noticed how some people stay stuck in the past long after everyone else seems to have moved on? Maybe it's an old relationship. Maybe it's a friendship that ended without explanation. Maybe it's a version of your life that no longer exists. And yet, somehow, your mind keeps going back there. Not once in a while, not occasionally, but almost every day. You tell yourself you're done thinking about it. Then a song plays, a photo appears, a familiar place brings back a memory, and suddenly you're right back inside a chapter that was supposed to be over. What's frustrating is that you often know it isn't helping you. You know that replaying the same memories won't change what happened. You know that revisiting old conversations won't create a different ending. But your mind keeps returning anyway. If you've ever experienced that, you're far from alone. In fact, one of the most common emotional struggles people face isn't dealing with what happened. It's dealing with the fact that what happened continues to live inside their mind long after the event itself is gone. And this creates a strange kind of exhaustion. Not the kind that comes from working too much. Not the kind that comes from lack of sleep. But the kind that comes from carrying an invisible emotional weight that nobody else can see. You go through your day normally. You answer messages. You go to work. You laugh when you're supposed to laugh. You do everything that looks normal from the outside. Yet internally, part of your attention is still attached to something behind you. The strange part is that most people assume this happens because they're weak, emotional, or incapable of letting go. But that's rarely the real reason. The human mind doesn't hold on to things simply because they mattered. It holds on to things because they still feel unresolved. And there's a huge difference between those two things. Think about it. Sometimes the people who struggle the most to move on aren't the ones who love the deepest. They're the ones who never got the answers they needed. The ones who never got closure. The ones who keep asking themselves questions that have no response. Why did they leave? What changed? What did I do wrong? Could I have done something differently? Those questions may seem harmless, but over time they quietly become mental loops. And the brain has a powerful tendency to revisit anything it believes remains unfinished. This is why some memories refuse to fade. Not because they're stronger than others, but because your mind keeps reopening them, searching for a conclusion it never found. And here's what makes this even more complicated. Many people think they're attached to a person. but often they're attached to the meaning that person created, the future they imagined, the identity they had during that period, the version of themselves that existed before everything changed. And when that disappears, the mind doesn't only grieve the loss, it struggles to understand who it is without it, which is where an even deeper psychological pattern begins to appear. What most people don't realize is that the hardest part about moving on is often not the loss itself. It's the invisible mental process that begins after the loss. Because while you may believe you're thinking about the past on purpose, much of what's happening is actually automatic. Your brain is designed to solve problems. When something feels incomplete, uncertain, or emotionally significant, your mind treats it like an unfinished task, keeps bringing it back to your attention, not because it wants to hurt you, but because it believes there's still something left to figure out. At first, this seems harmless. You replay a conversation. You revisit a memory. You think about what you should have said. You imagine different outcomes. But then something interesting starts happening. The more your brain returns to the same emotional experience, the more familiar that experience becomes. And the human brain has a natural tendency to return to what feels familiar, even when it's painful. That's where many people get trapped without realizing it. They think they're trying to let go, but unconsciously, they're rehearsing the attachment every single day. Every replay strengthens the emotional pathway connected to that memory. Every what if keeps the story active. Every imagined scenario tells the brain that this issue is still important and deserves attention. Over time, the mind stops treating it as a past event. It starts treating it as a current reality. This is why some people can feel emotionally affected by something that happened years ago as if it occurred yesterday. Not because time stood still, but because their mind never stopped feeding the emotional connection. And this pattern doesn't stay inside your head. It slowly begins to influence your behavior in ways that are difficult to notice. For example, someone who was deeply hurt in a relationship may become more cautious around new people. Not intentionally, not consciously, but because their brain learned to associate emotional investment with potential pain. Someone who experienced rejection may start overanalyzing text messages. Someone who felt abandoned may become unusually sensitive to changes in someone's tone of voice. Someone who never received answers may become obsessed with finding certainty everywhere else. The original event may be over, but the behavioral adaptations remain active. And this creates a powerful illusion. People often believe they're reacting to the present moment. In reality, they're reacting to old emotional patterns that were never fully processed. This becomes especially visible in social situations. You meet someone new, but part of your mind compares them to someone from your past. You enter a healthy relationship, but old fears quietly influence your expectations. You receive a delayed reply, and your brain immediately creates a story that has nothing to do with what's actually happening. The situation seems current. The reaction is often historical. And because these processes happen so quickly, most people never notice the connection. They only notice the anxiety, the overthinking, the emotional exhaustion. What they don't see is the invisible pattern running underneath it all. A pattern that makes the past feel present, uncertainty feel dangerous, and emotional memories feel impossible to escape. And the longer this pattern remains unnoticed, the more it begins shaping not only how you remember the past, but also how you interpret everything happening around you today. And this is where the effects become visible, not just inside your mind, but in the way you move through the world. Because the longer someone stays emotionally attached to the past, the more their behavior begins to change without them realizing it. At first, the changes are subtle. You become a little more cautious, a little more hesitant, a little less willing to trust what feels good. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious. But over time, these small adjustments start stacking on top of each other. And eventually, they create a completely different version of how you interact with people. Think about someone who once felt deeply connected to another person. They shared their thoughts freely. They were spontaneous, present, emotionally available. Then something happened. A breakup, a betrayal, a rejection, an unanswered goodbye. The event ends, but the mind keeps studying it. And while the person believes they're simply being careful now, something deeper is happening. Their brain starts building protective patterns. Not because it wants happiness, because it wants safety. And safety often comes at a cost. Without realizing it, they begin filtering every new experience through old emotional memories. They hesitate before opening up. They second-guess their feelings. They hold back parts of themselves. Not because the people around them are dangerous, but because their brain is still trying to avoid a pain that already happened. This is one reason why some people seem distant even when they genuinely want connection. It's not that they don't care. It's that a part of them is still protecting an old wound. And the strange thing is that other people can often sense this. Not consciously, but emotionally. Human beings constantly read signals from one another. Confidence, tension, openness, fear, trust, guardedness. Most of these signals are communicated without words. So when someone is emotionally trapped in unresolved experiences, it often affects how others respond to them. Conversations become shorter. Connections feel weaker. Relationships struggle to deepen, not because something is wrong with them, but because emotional self-protection changes the energy they bring into social situations. And here's what makes this cycle so difficult to notice. When people receive less connection, they often interpret it as proof that something is wrong with them. So they withdraw even more. They become more cautious, more analytical, more focused on avoiding disappointment, which creates even more emotional distance. The brain sees this outcome and says, "See? I was right to be careful." The protective pattern gets reinforced, and the cycle continues. This is why some people spend years feeling disconnected without understanding why. They believe they're reacting to the present, but much of their behavior is being shaped by emotional experiences that happened long ago. The past quietly influences their posture, their decisions, their expectations, and even the opportunities they allow themselves to pursue. And perhaps the most surprising part is that many people who can't move on aren't actually holding on to another person anymore. They're holding on to the version of themselves that existed before the loss. The version that felt secure, certain, hopeful. The version that didn't yet know what was coming. And until the mind understands this difference, it keeps searching for solutions in places where the real problem doesn't exist. Your brain doesn't react to the present only. It reacts to emotional memories stored from past experiences that never fully closed. And this is where the story becomes much deeper than most people imagine. Because when someone struggles to move on, the real issue is often not the event they're focused on today. It's the emotional pattern that event activated. Think about it. Have you ever wondered why two people can experience the exact same situation and react completely differently? One person goes through a breakup, feels the pain, processes it, and gradually rebuilds their life. Another person experiences a similar breakup and spends years mentally trapped inside it. The difference is rarely the event itself. The difference is what that event connected to beneath the surface. Most emotional pain doesn't arrive alone. It attaches itself to older emotional memories that were already living inside the mind. This happens so automatically that most people never notice it. A rejection today can awaken feelings of rejection from years ago. A betrayal in adulthood can reactivate emotional wounds that existed long before the relationship ever began. A loss in the present can trigger fears that have been quietly stored for decades. The conscious mind sees one event. The emotional brain experiences many events at once. That's why certain situations feel much heavier than they logically should. It's not because you're reacting to one moment. It's because multiple emotional memories are being activated simultaneously. And here's where things become even more interesting. The brain doesn't store emotional memories the same way it stores facts. You may forget details. You may forget dates. You may forget conversations. But emotional experiences often remain stored in a much deeper way. That's why a smell, a song, a place, or even a facial expression can suddenly trigger powerful feelings without warning. Your conscious mind may not immediately understand what's happening, but your emotional system recognizes the pattern instantly. And when those old emotional memories remain unresolved, the brain develops expectations based on them. not expectations about the past. Expectations about the future. This is one of the most overlooked psychological patterns in human behavior. People don't simply remember old pain. They begin anticipating new pain. Someone who experienced abandonment may unconsciously expect people to leave. Someone who felt invisible growing up may constantly search for signs of rejection. Someone who experienced betrayal may struggle to fully trust even trustworthy people. The mind starts predicting outcomes before they happen. And because the brain is always looking for evidence to confirm what it already believes, it becomes highly sensitive to anything that resembles those old emotional experiences. A delayed response becomes a sign of distance. A disagreement feels like the beginning of rejection. A small misunderstanding feels much larger than it actually is. Not because the present situation is dangerous, but because emotional memory is influencing perception. And this is why some people feel trapped in repeating the same emotional stories over and over again. Different faces, different places, different relationships. Yet somehow the feelings always seem familiar. The details change. The emotional pattern remains. Because until the brain recognizes the deeper memory driving the reaction, it continues treating old emotional wounds as if they are current realities. And once that pattern becomes part of someone's identity, the line between who they are and what they experience starts becoming surprisingly difficult to separate. The moment you start observing these patterns instead of reacting to them automatically, something subtle begins to change. Not overnight, not in a dramatic way, and certainly not because you suddenly found the perfect answer, but because awareness creates a small distance between you and the emotional loop that has been running for so long. For many people, the inability to move on feels like proof of something. Proof that they still love the person. Proof that they lost something irreplaceable. Proof that they're broken in some way. Proof that they'll never fully recover. But what if that's not what's happening at all? What if the real story is much different from the one your mind has been repeating? Because when people stay emotionally attached to the past, they often assume they're holding on because the memory is important. Yet importance alone doesn't explain why some experiences stay active for years while others slowly fade. Sometimes what keeps the emotional cycle alive isn't the event itself. It's the meaning attached to it, the interpretation, the story the mind created around what happened. And once that story becomes familiar, it starts influencing everything else. A person who believes they were abandoned may begin seeing abandonment everywhere. A person who believes they were never enough may start searching for evidence of that belief in every interaction. A person who believes their best days are behind them may stop noticing opportunities that exist right in front of them. Not because reality confirms those conclusions, but because perception quietly filters experience. And this is where many people misunderstand emotional healing. They think the goal is to erase memories, to stop thinking about the past, to force themselves to forget. But human beings don't work that way. The mind doesn't simply delete meaningful experiences. What often changes first is not the memory itself. It's the relationship you have with the memory. The same event can remain part of your story without controlling your behavior. The same experience can exist without defining your identity. The same emotional wound can be remembered without constantly shaping your future decisions. And that shift usually begins when a person becomes curious instead of reactive. When they stop asking, "Why can't I move on?" and start asking, "What keeps pulling me back?" Those are very different questions. One assumes weakness, the other invites understanding. And understanding changes everything. Because the more you recognize the patterns operating beneath your emotions, the harder it becomes for those patterns to control you without your awareness. You begin noticing when an old memory is influencing a new situation. You recognize when fear is speaking in the voice of experience. You start separating what is happening now from what happened years ago. Not perfectly, not every time, but often enough to create a different relationship with your own mind. And perhaps that's the most important realization of all. People who can't move on are not always trapped by the past. Sometimes they're trapped by the way they've learned to interpret the past. And the moment that interpretation begins to shift, something else shifts with it. Not the memory, not the history, but the emotional grip it has held for so long. And once that begins to happen, the mind starts seeing possibilities where it once saw only endings. Maybe that's why some people spend years trying to move on and never quite understand why it feels so difficult. Not because the past is stronger than they are, not because they lack willpower, but because certain experiences don't simply disappear when time passes. They become part of the way the mind interprets reality. And for a long time, that interpretation can feel invisible. You wake up, go through your routine, meet new people, make new decisions, and believe you're responding to the present moment. Yet sometimes, without realizing it, you're standing in today's world while emotionally looking through yesterday's window. What's fascinating is that most people spend their lives trying to change their circumstances. A different relationship, a different city, a different job, a different chapter. But occasionally, the thing that changes everything isn't what happens next. It's the moment you begin seeing an old story for what it truly was. Not a prediction, not a destiny, not a permanent definition of who you are. Just a moment that happened. A moment that left an imprint. Because memories are strange. They don't live in the past the way we think they do. They continue existing in the questions we ask ourselves, in the meanings we attach to events, in the expectations we carry into rooms we've never entered before. And perhaps the most surprising part is this. The people, places, and experiences we struggle to release often reveal less about what we lost, and more about what we were searching for all along. Maybe that's why some memories stay with us. Not because they're asking to be relived, but because they're still asking to be understood. And somewhere between remembering and understanding, between holding on and letting go, there is a quiet space that most people rarely notice. A space where the past remains part of the story, without being the author of what comes next. If you made it all the way to the end, leave a comment saying, "I see the pattern now." It's always interesting to see how many people recognize these hidden behaviors in their own lives. If this video helped you understand something about yourself, take a second to hit the like button and subscribe for more videos about psychology, human behavior, emotional patterns, relationships, and the hidden forces that shape our daily decisions. And if you want to continue exploring how the mind works, click on the video appearing on your screen right now or dive into the playlist we've prepared for you. The next video connects perfectly with what you've just discovered here and may help you understand another piece of the puzzle. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.